this.
Small stuff to eat over here. Yes, I did. Thank you.
What if everyone could take their seats? We're going to start in 1 minute, please. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good. Yeah, a little tired today, but
Oh, good. Well,
all right.
You're over here,
Keeping Charlie going, huh? Good.
Maboka's last. Come on. And Dan, you're over by Keys here. We're going to call the special meeting of the City of Bloomington to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Representative Summer, Representative Brady,
Here.
Councilmember Mathy,
here.
Councilmember Bolin,
Here.
Councilmember Mwambwe,
Here.
Councilmember Painter,
Here.
Mayor Renner,
Here.
Councilmember Black,
Here.
Councilmember Crable,
Here.
and Senator Brady.
Okay, thank you all. First of all, in terms of public comment, we have no public comment. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. No
No
public
public comment. So just, I do want to mention a couple of things before talking about our distinguished guests. And it is Senator Barickman is running a little bit late, and we do have Councilmember Kim Bray, who is handling a delicate situation with her family, and she will not be able to join us. And Councilmember Carrillo is in Iowa and is working, so she will be unable to join us. But I do want to, yes.
Julie's car died like 3 blocks away.
And Julie is coming. Oh, that I did not know.
Yeah.
Her car died. That is not a good sign.
Yeah, she'll be here soon.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that, Councilmember Graybill. And first of all, I just want to thank State Senator and Leader Bill Brady for coming, and in order of seniority, Keith Summer and Dan Brady, although you're 2 years apart, right? 98 and 2000. Right. So we're very, very fortunate indeed to have such political clout, frankly, in our community, and we do realize that although Bloomington may be the biggest chunk, there are lots of communities that you have to balance, and we certainly understand that. As you understand, our job is to obviously advocate for the City of Bloomington and in our particular projects and needs, and you've all been very, very generous in the past with your time in meeting with myself and the city manager and others, and this is an opportunity for us to talk publicly about some of our capital requests that we have communicated to you in the past, and to get some, so that this is also part, we don't really have, we've only got a couple of distinguished people from the public, but we do have certainly the media that can help get this message across. But we also want to hear in the upcoming legislative session from you any things that you believe that we should know about and questions that we may have of you. But we are very, very honored to have you all with us. Thank you so much for giving up part of your Saturdays, and we're very, very happy to have that. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Gleason. Mr. Gleason has some opening remarks as well.
And
Oh, excuse me, one other thing. I am so sorry. I did not recognize our Julie Curry. Very, very bad mayor, yes. Thank you, our legislative liaison, our former state representative Julie Curry. Again, we're honored to have you. Thank you for coming. And I apologize for last but not least. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, Senator Brady, Representatives Summer and Brady, for attending this session. While the city of Bloomington's had these in the past, it's really thanks to the state representatives on providing input on how do we maximize this opportunity. So that's why we've moved this earlier in the session. I think in the past we've had these in April or May. And then also the idea of doing this on a Saturday morning seemed to meet the needs for everybody. So thank you very much for that input so that we can have this meeting a little bit more value than maybe what we've done in the past. Like the mayor said, this is an opportunity for us to reaffirm publicly what our capital bill project asks are. But while we're doing that, I want to be very clear that we've set in motion some of these asks of our state representatives, and some things are in play. It just was a nice fit to the legislative update session that we have today, and there's 4 of them, just as a reminder. We have an economic development ask for the downtown of $3.5 million that can be applied to many different areas. Also an emergency operations center. And actually out of those initial conversations, there are ongoing conversations about the possibility of building one that is a joint project with the other governmental entities. So that's in play. We've talked about a road project, Hamilton-Bund to Commerce, and that one actually is in play as well. We're looking for any additional funds at the state or federal level, but with the passage of the 19-cent per gallon motor fuel tax, that's going to help us with the construction of that. And then also O'Neill Pool is one that we've discussed also as our 4th capital project. No certain order, but and I'm going to pause. We're going to recognize State Senator Jason Barickman. And we know also that we've got opportunities at the governor's level with some of the capital bill funding. So a number of these things are already in play. It was just an opportunity to revisit it in this session. Mayor, back to you.
Thank you very much. At this point, what we can begin, again, welcome Senator Barickman, and your son is, please have a seat right there, because we've got a member of the city council who's not going to be able to make it. So perfect timing and perfect placing. And he's looking at information about the Atlas. And very important not to exist in a time-space vacuum. Very good. At this point, thank you so much. And I believe one thing that may be useful is for us to start with Leader Brady and maybe make some comments, anything that you might think would be important in terms of introductory remarks.
Well, let me first say thank you all for having us here. The communication between elected officials is important as well. We're to serve our constituents, and as a resident of Bloomington, I appreciate particularly the work you all do. The requests that you've given are concise and there. Let me just start with a little narrative. Last year, we all worked hard in a bipartisan way to pass a capital infrastructure bill, both horizontal and vertical. It was a bill that many of us knew we needed, and although maybe we didn't necessarily all agree exactly on how the revenue should come about, we ended up coming to an agreement in a bipartisan way to provide revenues and funding. Some of the funding in the capital bill remains in question, but much of it is for real. The programs that you've had, in October we came out with the multi-year program, and for years one thing you've all talked about is Hamilton Road, and there are resources in the Department of Transportation's annual appropriation for Hamilton Road and for the out years. as part of a line item. So we're pleased as a delegation to be able to advocate for that and see that delivered. The other programs we've advocated for collectively, and what I will tell you is we have to balance the interests of the capital programs throughout the state and within our own districts. And we have forwarded these allocations on to the governor's office. The budget was put together where in a lot of areas we refer to it as buckets: an economic development bucket, an education bucket, port bucket, various buckets. That we're working through the process now to prioritize the interests of the state. We've introduced your requests into the concept, and we will be continuing to advocate and move forward that our community, whether there's enough money for all your requests is not necessarily true in this bill, because as you said, we all have various communities we represent, and it's important that all legislators be treated equally. You know, in the overall capital bill, downstate Illinois will greatly benefit from the transportation, road, bridges, rail, and other things, where Chicago will get a bigger share of the mass transit because of the interest in the investments in those places. But overall, a balance, and we'll advocate for that balance and your interest in these projects.
Thank you very much. Senator Barickman.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you to the mayor and council members for having us. Again, apologies on my bit tardiness. We had an early basketball game, and we're very successful, right? To the Y, in fact. I guess just I'll comment maybe generally on my perspective of last year and kind of this year where things may go. I thought last year, I called last year a mixed bag. Kind of earlier on in the legislative cycle, there were a number of legislative issues that were advanced primarily on a partisan basis, kind of muscled through on partisan roll calls. That attitude shifted late in the legislative cycle, where you saw on some key issues, the capital bill certainly being one of those, where the two sides were able to come together and come to bipartisan agreements. I think that was good and healthy, and I hope to see more of that as we embark on this spring 2020 legislative cycle. I think rightfully so, this spring there will be a lot of attention on the budget. I think passing a balanced budget in any year in Illinois is tough. This year is going to be no exception. You've already see the framing that there are a number of obligations and various things coming due that are going to cause that are going to cost more money this year than last year. A common one where I think there's broad bipartisan support is funding for K through 12. K through 12 funding has risen year after year for probably the last 5 years. Very meaningful investments being made in our K-12 school districts. Strong bipartisan support for those expenditures, but that money has to come from somewhere. And that's one of many of the budgetary pressures that I think you're going to see this year. The pensions, of course, pension costs and state payments are going to go up this year, not down. And so that's across the board, and I think it's going to make passing a balanced budget this year very difficult. There's a number of other issues that are certainly in the headlines and I think are going to generate a lot of attention, whether that's property tax relief, whether that's ethics reforms. Many of us have made the point, I think, based strongly on public policy, that the state should adopt a constitutional amendment in favor of an independent and fair redistricting process. And that's relevant because we're about to complete the 2020 census, and once that's complete, of course, the state, sometime between now and next year, will go through the 10-year redistricting process. So how we do that, I think, matters, and there will be a lot of attention, I think, placed on that this year. So with that, Glad to be here. Glad to work with all of you, and look forward to whatever questions and dialogue may come today. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And we'll move over to this side. We'll start with Senator, Representative Brady and then Representative Summer.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. And Mayor, thank you for the opportunity, and council members and everyone else that is here. And first off, I'd like to say that Tim Gleason and his associates, Billy, do an excellent job of communications with us in Springfield, as well as Julie Curry, who represents the city and works with us on an almost daily basis in the House and the Senate. She's the type of individual that when she's advocating on behalf of the city, she has her facts and figures and things together, and you can bank on what she says, which is extremely helpful when you're navigating through the halls of Springfield. So it's a good team, and I certainly applaud you for having that team together and in place. To dovetail in on what Billy and Jason just said, the capital bill, really in the two forms, the horizontal and the vertical capital, and what was passed, all of us at the 11th hour were a little surprised that we got to that point, but we got to that point in a bipartisan fashion. Illinois State University became the first benefactor of that in higher education, with the $53 million, actually 61.9, that has been allotted over the last couple of years, planning money, and now the potential the release of the 53 for their fine arts building. Those are tangible and real projects. This state has not had a capital bill since 2008, 2009. The needs are great, the requests are many, and the funding is, as was alluded to earlier, is there in certain places, but there's one thing that we had to do, and we had to pay for that, because you just don't have the ability to do certain things with all the requests without paying for them. And I think that's very important to remember. So we came up with the different ways in paying for that, in particular the increase in the gas tax. But for those of us that listen to our constituents who have concerns and problems and complaints with the roads, the bridges, and the infrastructure of the state, we are trying to be attentive as we can to those needs and be realistic. City of Bloomington and the requests that you brought to us, whether that's all going to be, at the end of the day, we don't know. There's going to be a division between the caucuses as far as money that will be divided capital-wise, and then there, of course, be what's in the IDOT budget. What's in the IDOT budget has infrastructure needs throughout McLean County and throughout my district to the tune of about $170 million over the next 5 years. Included in that is some of the State Highway Center, Street 51, 150, Route 9, that goes through the heart of Bloomington. So we're encouraged by that. We will continue to work with you to the best of our ability and prioritize those projects that Mr. Gleason and company has brought to our attention. So thank you, and glad to be here.
Representative Summer, thank you.
Good morning. The most important issue to me is our working relationship. We have a good one. We have a cohesive legislative team, but we also have a good working relationship with the Bloomington Council, and we have had for many years, and it's important that continue. Appreciate your leadership, Mayor, and all the council members. My longtime friend Tim Gleason is a true asset to your community, and
Now let's see, where is he from? Oh, that's right, same hometown.
a little west from here. But my colleagues have talked about the many issues that we face. The governor's State of the State address this week was positive, and I appreciate the governor. He is a very personable and engaging individual whose door is always open, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or somewhere in between. I really appreciate his approach. His message this week was very positive. Certainly we may disagree on some issues. But in the long run, we still have fiscal challenges. and we need to meet those. And in addition to the topics my colleagues talked about, I was happy to see that we were successful, or the city was successful, not necessarily us legislators, in advocating for and getting some funding for your requests, particularly Hamilton Road. It's important to me because I recall not too long ago being invited to a meeting at the fire station on Hamilton Road. Of course, here I am, the guy from another county coming from the west, and I think, gee, I'll just hop on Hamilton Road on the west end here, and I'll get there. And it took me forever to figure, well, I wasn't going to get there until I finally worked my way down Veterans and found the fire station. So that's going to help many of us who are not familiar with the community, as all of you are, to access areas of the community more easily. So that's going to help me, and I'm glad that was so far in the works. I'll just say that let's continue to work together as we have. I'm here to listen to what specific concerns you have, not just on infrastructure, but maybe more particular of interest to your community, or things that you're challenged with, or issues that you share with other municipalities across the state. And welcome your comments, and any way I can be of assistance, I certainly will make an effort. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ms. Curry. Any preference, before I turn to the council with questions, comments, anything that you want to add?
Good morning, everyone. I think maybe the only thing that I would add as we talk about the infrastructure projects that we have, maybe the legislators could address the differences in funding for the road projects through the motor fuel tax, and then the vertical infrastructure, which, you know, is reliant on new revenues from gaming and stuff. So there's a bit of a lag in terms of the announcement of those projects, and I think that's probably an important thing to talk about.
So just to clarify some of the funding processes for some of the capital projects. And so if we could turn it over to any of our legislators.
As Julie pointed out, much of the capital program, unlike others, is pay-as-you-go. But there's a large component of it that is bonded. And the Office of Budget and Management is going through the process of trying to collect the data on what they believe will be the revenues that are yet to come, how they will come, and what we will be able to afford timing-wise in terms of bonding for those projects. So you probably heard that the Chicago casino's up in the air, for instance, and that revenue, as revenues come in for that, determine the level of which we can bond. Other ones are proceeding, and so it just all depends, as Representative Curry indicated, that it depends on how the public takes the opportunity to do with this. And there's others that are in question. For instance, bad news on the cigarette tax increase. It purported to bring several million, tens of millions of dollars in, and yet what some of us argued against is, in fact, the tax has decreased revenues. So some of the revenues we believe are fictitious in the overall, like that. So it just depends on as these things continue.
Okay. Any other comments on that, on Ms. Curry's question? Seeing none. Members of the council, comments, questions from members of the council? I'm looking at Councilmember Boland. She always has questions. Councilmember Black. Oh, I'm sorry. What'd you say? If you. Oh, okay. Could you specify what you said, and then we'll move to Councilmember Black.
Can you hear me now? So what I wanted to get the legislators to address was the issue of we've got the vertical infrastructure, which are different types of projects, and then the horizontal infrastructure in the budget, which is roads, bridges, that kind of thing. They're funded from different pots of money. The vertical infrastructure, which would fund some of the projects that we're talking about, that the city of Bloomington is interested in, come from the vertical infrastructure program. That's funded from new revenues, as Leader Brady indicated, from gaming, new casinos, and that kind of thing. That money hasn't come in yet. So what we try to stress to communities throughout the state is that while we have priorities, they may not happen immediately because we have to wait for this revenue to come in so that they can, do the proper bonding and borrowing to pay for it.
And if it's fictitious revenue, we may not see it.
Correct.
All right, all right. Okay. We did have Councilmember Black, actually.
Go ahead. Go down.
Wait, I saw your light
Oh, okay.
first, so.
Cool. As you made comments about gambling revenue, I feel partially responsible. As part of my new married life, I can't go to the casino like I used to, so I apologize for that.
You poor millennial.
It's just so terrible. Yeah, that's right. There's the wife's law about that. Stay off the craps table. We've done these a couple of times, and so I just want to thank our state officials for coming out and chatting with us, and at a really high level, and I'll just speak for myself here, when we talk about issues that come through from the state, we're obviously have a couple of big projects here, but just keeping in mind, unfunded mandates and trying to do no harm to us. That when we get, ambiguous legislation or, things that we didn't plan for, unintended consequences that we have to sort through those issues, that's time and energy of our staff and our electeds, and keeping that in mind at a very high level. But we appreciate the working relationship. Everybody here has been very responsive to all of our concerns, so thank you for that. I just wanted to advocate for O'Neill Pool. In the list of projects that we have, it's very easy to say, an emergency operations center, who could be opposed to that? Hamilton Bund Commerce has been on the docket for many years, so it might seem easy to say, well, O'Neill Pool is just a pool, but it's 20 years overdue. There is a economic development component that could potentially be there from spillover effects off of Market Street. But mostly I look at it as an area in West Bloomington that is well overdue for a renovation. We've gone, 20 years or so over the expected life of that facility. Plus, it's good to have a place for kids to go in an area that they may not have a lot of options. And so there's a public safety component as well. And as someone who spent many hours in O'Neill Pool, the neighbors are there, the neighborhood's looking for it. It's a key project, I think, that could be make a big impact in an area that frankly hasn't seen a lot of big projects come through. So I don't know how the revenue funding would come through or what capital bill would fund such a project, but keep that in mind. I know that some people might say, well, it's just a pool. It's a want, not a need. This is a need in an area that is desperate for investment and ripe for major funding. So we're excited. We're on board with trying to find something, but if we can take it from a like-for-like project, some people have talked about a wave pool. That people is mostly me. But aquatic center, I mean, that's a piece of land that in an area that again, could use it and make a big impact for the neighbors.
Thank you very much. And consistent with that, one of the last comments that Chief Clay Wheeler, former Chief Clay Wheeler, made when we had maybe it was a May 1st orientation, was when we were on the bus to say, please help us with crime on the west side amongst at-risk youth, fund O'Neill Pool. And he was making the case from the standpoint of law enforcement prevention. So let's see. I will go back to Councilmember Bolin. And I'm sorry,
Jamie?
Mayor, if I may, just to go
Please.
back to
Please.
Julie Curry's comment on the capital side of things and the funding side of things. Keep in mind when we talk about our roads, bridges, and infrastructure and that pot of money in the capital and the revenue coming from the motor fuel tax, that was a provision that was passed by the voters in the lockbox provision, a constitutional amendment, last election cycle. Therefore, as much as you can get a guarantee, guaranteeing that those funds coming in, why they are helping the city of Bloomington, the town of Normal, townships across the state of Illinois with the motor fuel tax side of things. But the fact is that that provision guarantees that those dollars are going to go to roads, bridges, and infrastructure within the state. So I think that's something to keep in mind. That's an assurance that many of us felt was extremely necessary and important to be able to move forward in support of that. But there is the revenue component that's protected and goes to what it should, and I think that's important to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you very much. And back to Councilmember Boland.
Thank you for answering the question or repeating what you had said about the funding. I don't really have any questions about that. I understand the money may not come in. I was always skeptical about raising or doing the gambling. It's like, yeah, okay, we can predict millions of dollars, but I'll see it when I believe it, or believe it when I see it, sorry. Concerning Hamilton Road, I've lived over on that side for many years, and one thing, aside from getting lost if you're traveling in, because you have to go down and turn and all that, there is a safety issue. I made the mistake of taking Hamilton Road. I thought I'd get home faster, and it was during rush hour from State Farm, and a fire truck had to come to serve the neighborhood in Ward 2, and it couldn't get through because it's a two-lane county road. So everybody on that road coming home from State Farm had to like scatter into the ditches to let the truck go through. And this has been going on for 20 years. So I think it needs to be taken care of and be a high priority. Thank you.
Just on that, it's also critical to our Connect Transit, mass transit connecting the east-west corridor, and for economic development for areas and properties around that area for our particular community. And I believe the figure Jim Cart cited years ago, it's probably stale, but it can't be too far off, was that it would reduce traffic on Veterans Parkway at peak times by up to somewhere around 23%. So there are lots of benefits to the Hamilton Road extension. You'd be able to go from Corporate South to the interstate on a four-lane highway without ever going on Veterans. So, Councilmember Mathy.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, thank you to all of our state officials. You know, I don't want to belittle the challenges that we're all facing. We know that they're great. We know that there's a lot of things that we have to do. I just want to just give you a reference point that I travel a lot to a lot of different conferences of various types for work. And I'll just let you know that nobody beats up on the state of Illinois like people who live in Illinois. You know, a lot of times when I'm talking to other people, they're very excited to talk about various things that we have going on in Illinois. So we're very doom and gloom about ourselves, but not necessarily the rest of the world sees us the same way as we see ourselves. So just keep up the good fight on that. Two things I wanted to bring up. I think I've talked to all of you individually about that, and the city manager probably at some point going to get tired of me talking to him about it. Deals with small cell deployment for the 5G networks. Last year, or it might have been in late 2017, there was a bill passed through the state that actually limited municipal ability to kind of quote-unquote control our own destiny in terms of where this equipment is placed. And it basically said that we no longer have the ability to kind of work with the cellular companies and dictate where they put equipment at, that basically every pole is fair game and they can do whatever they want. We would like to see that reversed. We would like to see control return back to the municipalities so that we can work with them to properly site equipment and put it in the right places. We have a lot of historic neighborhoods and beautiful architecture and things that we spend a lot of money trying to protect and maintain. And the last thing I think any of us want is massive piles of cellular equipment and wires hanging off of streetlight poles all through those neighborhoods, which is exactly what they're going to have to do, and it's been done in other states already. Many horror stories all over the United States. So if that bill comes through, I know it's something the Illinois Municipal League has got on their agenda for this year as well, is we're definitely looking for you to return control of how 5G is rolled out, where that equipment is placed back to the cities, so that we can advocate in our own best interest for how that's done. The second thing I wanted to bring up this morning too is we're going to be pushing significantly on a lot more high-tech smart city type projects, and there'll be a lot more information coming out about those. Where we could use your help in those is, we had a design process that we just went through in a review last year here at the city for Route 9, and they're going to, the design process looks like they're going to take Route 9 back down to the base level and rebuild it, which means that we're not going to see major construction like that along Route 9 for 25 or 30 more years after this time. I would like to see us at least bury empty conduit next to Route 9 where additional fiber can be put in there. I think that there's going to be a need in the future, especially when we're talking about things like autonomous vehicles. There's going to be a significant additional need for technology infrastructure, and right now empty conduit is pennies on the dollar compared to if we have to dig everything up later. So if we can, I don't know how the positioning works, but if we can advocate during that design process to put in some empty conduit next to the roads that can be used for future technologies, be that wireless, they call it infrastructure to automotive, I to A, things of that nature, that is going to save us potentially, hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of dollars in the future. So if we just take some preventative or future-looking steps now, that will make all of our lives much easier when we need to do this, 5, 10, 15 years from now. And other than that, keep up the good fight. We all appreciate all the work that you do. Thank you.
Councilmember Craybill.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for coming. It means a lot, and I know that you guys aren't just here once a year. You guys are involved in the community. Representative Summers, I've seen you at Heartland Head Start, involved with that, and much appreciated. And I'll just say, with regard to our capital needs, I think that they're modest, and that's thanks to Tim and his staff. He's really focused on the things that we really need, and things that are doable. So if you could keep that in mind, and also wanted to ask a couple of questions. What your thoughts are on what's going to happen with, I think they're combining police and fire pensions systems, and how that could impact communities. And I'll bring up the word cannabis and what you guys are seeing now with regard to what you think is going to happen, changes, when our regulation is going to come down, anything, knowledge that you have on that you could share. Thank you.
So just to separate, there was some update or reactions on the merging of police fire pensions, and then what the state of cannabis is. Seems to be everybody's favorite topic. Although after the months that we spent on ours, if I never hear a debate about cannabis again, it'll be too soon. But it is an important question. I'm just joking. So do we have any reactions on the merging of the police fire pensions or status updates on that? Anybody want to weigh in?
I don't, other than Tim may know more than, do you know what your process is?
I guess from a municipal standpoint, we're just stepping back and waiting to see what's going to occur in the 24-month transition. One of the things as we're building our FY21 budget, and it's part of the conversations with the elected officials. Currently, we fund our police and fire pensions at 100%. We're interested in what the transition's going to provide in terms of funding. If they lessen the amount that we're required to fund as a mandate, that might provide opportunities for us to take some of that revenue that was funding at 100% currently, and we might be able to do some other projects at the city. So it's sort of a wait and see.
I think when this first came out, many people that contacted me, retirees especially, police and fire, were very concerned and confused over the fact that they thought it was this commingling of funds that had been talked about from a previous governor, a previous administration, that you would send, for instance, IMRF dollars to Springfield, and we would take care of the investment side of things. That is not the case here. This is something that has potential that I saw for Bloomington's portfolio in fire alone was an additional potential of $1.5 million of investment dollars by doing what this proposal plans to do. The jury is still out, but I think that the support came from the PVPA eventually, and they were a little reluctant, the police benevolent. The Associated Firefighter side of things were on board from the very beginning, and I believe that it's 460-some individual investment boards that were out there across the state that were involved in the different investments of police fire. Obviously, those that were contracted to have the investment contracts were not supportive of this concept to bring it together. And in bringing it together, the way I understand, it's a governor's appointment for just that first year of those who are going to oversee, and there has to be a balance of representation of police fire on it and retirees. And then after that, the representation is elected individuals that want to run for the position. And I believe there's going to be 2 boards overall. So the consolidation, I think, has great potential. And the investment dollars, in the way that's been explained to me and shown, secured my vote. And I think long-term, it may have not only value to those who service publicly in police fire, but potentially for those homeowners out in properties when it comes to property tax.
Great points. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Sure.
Senator Barickman.
Sure, thanks. I guess to both topics. First, the pensions. I think the other piece that hasn't been raised, there were some enhancements to the Tier 2 pensions that I don't think, at least when we voted, there was any clarity on what the costs of some of those may be, but that's something that obviously is going to have to be factored as well. And I think those, while there may be some benefits to some consolidation that plays out over time, some of those Tier 2 benefits, I'm not sure exactly the date that those are put in place, but those are real, and those are going to come about, I presume, right away. On cannabis, I think the thing that's probably most significant right now is when the state legalized cannabis, there was actually 5 license categories that were created. There's been a lot of public discussion about 2 of those, the cultivation centers and the dispensaries, obviously at the local level. Those other 3 licenses are going to be put in place in this year, 2020. Those are things like a craft grower's license, a transportation license, and I think what's called an infuser or processing type license. My understanding is that the administration is publishing rules on how that will all work. There's applications that are being published, so if someone wants to be a craft grower, they fill out the forms and apply to the state. I think there will be an ongoing discussion about some of that. Again, maybe a continuation of some of the conversation you all have been having. While I anticipate that the state will make clarifications to the existing law, I don't anticipate that there's going to be any significant changes in the short term. I could be wrong. I think there's going to be discussion on a number of things like, are the taxes too high? How should there's some communities that have existing medical dispensaries that have since voted to opt out of having cannabis in their community, and there's some questions about what happens to those existing license holders. So you could see some movement on something like that. There's been a very public discussion about public consumption. The law, I think, is very clear that public consumption is prohibited with the exception of an on-site consumption that may occur at a dispensary. I don't anticipate, I think there's going to be groups who are advocating to change that. In time, that may change. I don't know whether that time is this year or not. So,
I'm sorry, change to what?
to allow maybe a more public consumption. So if you consider public consumption today is limited very narrowly to only at an on-site dispensary in accordance with local rules, right, municipal decisions. There are some who are advocating to change that, to open that up more widely so that there might be consumption, say, at a bar or another place. I don't anticipate that that's going to change this year. I just know, again, publicly, there's been a lot of discussion of that.
Thank you very much. Our resident cannabis expert within the legislature. I mean that in a positive way.
Take each issue as they come.
All right. Other comments on those two questions? Councilmember Emig.
Well, if
Oh.
you're commenting on the question,
I'm
then I'll
sorry.
wait.
Representative Summer, I did not notice your...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
The police and fire, communities across my district are in support of the consolidation, pretty much uniform agreement that the concept is positive and will be financially beneficial. As Jason mentioned, there is another portion of that legislation dealing with changes to some pensions, and that was a concern, and that was probably the only concern I heard from municipalities at that time. Otherwise, they were pretty much in agreement, and I've not heard response from anyone else in the municipal government as to what they've heard. I think it's still a waiting game, like Mr. Gleason said, but I think it's a positive move and will benefit from it. Cannabis, I don't have the expertise that some of my colleagues have. I do believe that the euphoria experienced in the first days and the sales and the estimates of a financial benefit from the state probably overestimated. The state has a history of overestimating our revenues and underestimating our expenses, and then we get back to the conversation of what are the offshoots from cannabis in our communities. So, and those are many things you're going to have to deal with as a municipality, and how the legislation may change as to public consumption and those issues, I think would be more of interest to you. The benefit and regionally, the facility in Delavan has been there a few years and now is going to experience a tremendous growth, and it's going to mean jobs for that community. So for that community, it's beneficial. Then again, what it means to our culture overall, I'm still not sure what that means for Illinois as far as the future holds.
Thank you. Anything else? Councilmember Emig.
Yes, good morning. My apologies for being late. My 2007 Honda died right outside the Jimmy John's on Madison, and two Good Samaritans helped me push it out of the way, because you know that it's a major blind spot right there. In fact, the proprietor at Jimmy John's called the police in case I couldn't get it. So if those two Good Samaritans are listening, thank you. But my apologies for that. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us this morning. And my first statement is just that I'm really looking forward to finding a way to support the Bloomington Public Library and their efforts at a renovation. The last time they renovated was 2006, and they have a circulation of 1.39 million, which is 82% higher than it was in 2006. They have a visitor count of almost 1,000 people daily, and their program attendance includes 17,000 people, which is almost 30% higher than it was in 2006. And I've been there for those programs. Sometimes they have to turn people away. There's so many of us who are interested in participating. So that's just something that I really want to continue to advocate for.
And then two of my questions, the McLean County poverty rate in the last census report put us at about 14.4%. And I've gotten from a lot of sources locally that in the next count, we're going to see a significant rise in McLean County. So I'm just wondering if you have knowledge of this as well, and what your response might be. Certainly at the municipal level, we also have to be responsive to this reality. And I'm also really glad that you're focusing on K-12 education, and I wonder if you have any comments about the efforts to reduce our reliance on property taxes for funding such a large amount of our public education in Illinois. Thank you.
Okay. And just to clarify, by poverty rate, you're talking about McLean County, not the county, but Bloomington, Normal, and the unincorporated areas and small towns. As a metro area, our poverty rate went up as of the last census.
McLean County, that's
right.
the
Okay.
U.S. Census data.
Gotcha. Okay.
We're on the poverty
Thank you.
watch list. We're on the poverty watch list.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Comments, thoughts?
Sure. You emphasize the census. Let me say right now, the census is very important, and we all need to do everything we can collectively to make sure everyone is counted. The research we've done is traditionally we only count about 70% of the people, and as elected officials, I'd ask you to join us in trying to do everything we can to count everybody we can for representation purposes as well as financial resource purposes. The poverty statistics, I think, is alarming to me. Something that we in general focus on, but leave to communities to articulate. I will say that it ties into your latter question, but also we benefit in this community from very low unemployment, and I think we just saw another downtick recently. But if we're going to find, we've been very disappointed in the recent task force that was commissioned by the governor on property tax relief. I would say the Senate Republican caucus and the House Republican caucus were underwhelmed with what the other parties were willing to throw on the table to provide meaningful relief. But I will tell you this, in my opinion, property tax relief and education funding go hand in hand. The biggest portion of the property tax burden is to fund our schools. And we have told the governor that in order to solve this problem, we've got to follow a story. And the story is this. We need to do more things to increase employment in Illinois than what we've done. Now, I believe we took a great first step with the bipartisan infrastructure program that we provided, because to grow jobs, you've got to have an infrastructure. And our infrastructure was amongst one of the worst rated in the nation. And but taking that step, now we've got to leverage some real pro-business policies that will help grow. We've been very fortunate in this community, frankly, between Rivian and Brant. But much of Illinois has not been fortunate, and we lag behind other Midwestern states. And we've talked to the governor about reforms in the areas of workers' compensation and other things that businesses look at when they want to invest. But we've got to try to work to attract those businesses, and once we get those businesses attracted, we've got to stop growing other programs and take the government revenues that come to fund education. We've got to commit ourselves to even greater revenues toward education funding. And in turn, we've got to ask those school districts to use some of that money to relieve the property tax burden. So that's the story that needs to be told, and one that we need to commit ourselves to. In my opinion, if we're really going to get at the heart of the property tax relief, it's got to come through increased education funding at the state level, and the only way we're going to come up with that is to focus on job creation. Now, there's other elements that we're fighting for right now that we think are a detriment to that. Corruption in Illinois is at a terrible high. I think most of us, all of us here would advocate and ask you to help us advocate a vocal interest in where we think the root of corruption begins, and that is in The fact that two individuals from Chicago get to draw the legislative maps as they see fit, giving their party a supermajority. We think that is the root of power and corruption and needs to be changed, and I certainly advocate for a fair map. And the other thing that gives us great concerns is, and I think it's important we share that with you, is that the governor has put on the ballot a graduated income tax, which we believe doesn't provide for protections for middle-income families and what we've seen in other places. So these are two very serious issues that we hope people take seriously as we look forward to how we're going to turn the state around.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on those issues? Representative Brady.
In regards to the, I believe you said it's 14.4% poverty rate in McLean County. Obviously, we just had an increase in the minimum wage in this state. What that's truly going to do to business and how that's truly going to filter down to help the very poverty rate you're talking about remains to be seen. But that is one area in which at least those supportive of that overall change, I think, had the idea that that's going to be targeted at that poverty level, and that's going to help immensely. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I don't know that long-term it's not going to be a detriment to business, but we'll see. In regards to the property tax side of things in schools, of course, we get back to, I think Scott said, the unfunded mandates on the municipalities, unfunded mandates on schools, and being part of that property task force. One of the things that we wanted to look at was the reserve levels of different school districts throughout the state of Illinois and the actual property tax rate compared to what they had reserve-wise, but that was not something that was brought forward. So as far as the poverty rate, I certainly hope that your projection of that being, or what you're being told, that it's going to be even higher next time around census-wise is not the case. But those would be two areas in which I think from the state side of things there's been something that certainly may be helpful. It definitely is going to be a change. We'll have to wait and see.
Especially if we get as good a count as possible, one of the things that it tells us is where our greatest social problems are within our particular communities, not just Bloomington normal, but within McLean County. And that's something then that we as policymakers and at the state level can tailor their policies to be most effective. But, okay. Yes, Senator Barickman.
There we go. The little things.
That's absolutely right. Hang on to them. They grow up so
That's
fast,
right.
Jason. And they dare to have their own lives.
Right. On your two points, Julie. First of all, the poverty rate. I mean, I think that's concerning to anyone, of course. I definitely think there's more that we can do at the state level to help grow the economy. When the economy grows, I think it lifts all boats. The other thing that's related to that that's really caught my attention lately is just the mental health issues that are crossing our communities. That's not limited to Illinois by any means, but we're certainly seeing it in Illinois as we all deal with constituent issues and various things. I mean, I was alarmed, to say the least, when I found that we hear about things like there's a shortage of psychiatrists. That concept is kind of making its rounds. But that became very real to me recently when I learned that shortage was leading to someone just 2 weeks ago tried to obtain a psychiatrist appointment and was told that the first appointment available was in August. And that is a real issue that is creating struggles at a human level. And so I think that's an area where, again, there's more that we can do, state and local, but state for sure to address that. The K-12 funding, I think both my colleagues have touched on this, but just from the numbers perspective, I have not added it up, but I think in the last 5 years, the state of Illinois has increased its funding to K-12 across the state by, my hunch is around $1.5 billion. That is very real money. I have been have long argued that that was necessary, that investment was necessary. We're starting to, and that had broad bipartisan support to do that. But that is a massive amount of money that is moved from the state to local school districts. And the issue that is outstanding, now we changed the law on how that works several years ago, but the issue that loomed then continues to exist today. We could not come to an agreement then about how you might tie those increases in investment to property tax relief. The political will just didn't exist at the time. I think you're going to, I mentioned this earlier, we're going to continue to see increased support from the state to our schools. The hope is to try to find a way to bring those two issues together so that with that increased support, you start to see some meaningful property tax relief.
Great. Representative Summer.
I'd like to comment on the poverty rate also. Billy and I represent pretty much the west side of Bloomington, and some of our schools have high poverty rates. I've been involved with Irving School on numerous occasions, and pleased to have some of their students in Springfield last spring as pages. And every time I interact with Irving and other schools, it's an eye-opener. But and their poverty rate is certainly much greater than the one we're talking about. But I should also add that I come from a community that historically has had no poverty. Yet now their poverty rate is approaching double digits. And it's a social question, but it also is a challenge to our schools and our communities. How do we provide that appropriate education to those children, those families who don't have the resources that some of us are used to? I think we tend to think that, well, all parents, all the guardians have the same resources and experiences, or perhaps the education to further the future for their children, yet that's not the case. I think we need to be a little more introspective as to not just providing lunches or other meals, and I'm told that some schools that's perhaps the only food that some children get. What are the learning matrices? I've seen more movement now to social learning, not just the STEM, which is so so important into employment, but the social aspects and how do young people learn to function in a community. It's a larger question in our society, not just in our communities here, but across the state and across the country. There's a divide in assets, and there's a divide in opportunity educationally, and we need to be more mindful of that. Certainly we spend hundreds of millions of dollars more every year in the state level to schools, and are we actually providing a better benefit to those young people who are at risk? It's a much broader question. We could talk about it, and we could have experts come in, and our school districts could talk about it for many, many meetings, but I appreciate you bringing that topic up. It has lots of ramifications. Hey, we get job opportunities, but if we don't have the people who are educated enough to fill those job opportunities, which we've seen on many occasions, then they go elsewhere.
Thank you very much. At this point, what I would suggest that we do is take about a 10-minute break, bathroom break, and maybe more breakfast break, and then I'll confer with our city manager and maybe some council members and state representatives and our two state senators to see what topics we think, and with Ms. Curry, we still should address, so we can kind of guesstimate how much more time do we need. Do we need another half an hour? Do we need more than that as we move forward? So let's convene, let's say quarter after, and then we'll go from there. Okay? Thank you very much. Thanks. So there's some different types of issues that we would like to bring up still, when we come back. That's kind of what I'm asking. touched on several things, got some answers. Do we need another hour? Do we need a half an hour?
So we're allowed to talk about things other than the capital request.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
I
Julie opened, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of It's 10:14. I wonder if everyone could take their seats, please, so we can wrap this up. Thank you.
Sure, of course. Yeah, they both just, well,
If we could go ahead and reconvene our meeting then. Again, we very much appreciate all of your input and ideas and continuing our conversation and continue to build our relationship. And so we, at this point, will continue the special session of the Bloomington City Council, and I'm going to start with Council Member Painter, who did not get a chance to ask some questions before, and I'm going to turn that over to her. Council Member Painter.
Thank you, and thank you for coming today and listening to our concerns. My question, well, first question, is about DCFS. 127 children died in Illinois last year who were DCFS cases. That's rather alarming. I would like to know where the problem lies and what are we going to do to fix it.
Okay, we start with the DCFS question. Yeah, Representative Brady.
I don't have the statistics in front of me, but from my legislative district, I was quite an eye-opener. Very sad to see the number of cases that are in DCFS. In other words, the number of individuals, children that are served by DCFS in some way, shape, or form, which has grown over the years, obviously. I think that what you see in the legislature this spring session, which we started back last week, I think that you will see legislation dealing with potentially a complete overhaul of DCFS. And I suppose if you were to ask DCFS, they would say to the legislature, if you would give us more resources in a variety of fronts, maybe we could combat this. But I think it comes from the top down. I think it comes from leadership, and there has been, with directors in and out and going, there has been a problem. I think the total environment of which the system operates needs that overhaul that I think is coming. And I believe that maybe Representative Summer has served in the capacity of a committee structure to look at that. And, you know, just the overall operation and the number of cases and the increase in the family nuclei that has changed in this state, country, and the problems that are associated with that. And what seems to be the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing in that agency is obviously very concerning. Needs a massive overhaul, in my opinion.
We have, I can only, our caucus has been very concerned about this for over a year. And we've got a couple of representatives of the caucus who are working with the governor's office. Particularly alarming is the number of deaths of children that DCFS already had engaged with, right. and not, so there's a lot of good people who work at DCFS, don't get me wrong, but there is serious questions that need to be asked and answered, and we need to deal with this because I can only tell you, and I'm sure that the House Republicans as well, we are taking it very seriously, and we're holding the governor's feet to the fire on this because it's horrifying.
Representative Summer, yes, please.
Thanks for the question. As Representative Brady said, I have an involvement with this. There is a committee in the House called the Adoption and Child Welfare Committee. It's really an offshoot. We had an adoption committee for a number of years, and we really made a lot of progress in adoption in the state. I happen to be the Republican spokesman on that committee. We have had hearings with DCFS. DCFS has made efforts to restructure. In my mind, the real difficulty comes with the lack of coordination in investigations when it comes to alleged child abuse. Somewhere in that line of action, mistakes are being made. There will be, sure, significant legislation proposed this spring. I have talked to members in the community, those connected to the Roundtree family, and I did attend part of the trial of surrounding Rika's death. I have asked and this is something that will come up shortly in the legislature, though it's not a legislative act. It's a resolution asking the medical community to have more involvement in this process. It seems like when I read death investigations, the 50-some actual death investigations, or 100 and some this year, that the medical aspect, there's some question as how this is handled. I've reached out to the medical community locally and statewide as to what do they see as medical providers, as physicians or hospitals, where is their involvement, where do they see things that can be done. So not only is the legislature looking at that, but locally and around the state, groups are involved with medicine or looking at abuse and how we can recognize it earlier, or if we recognize it, then what is the referral process? In many cases, a suggestion is made to a caregiver that a child be seen by a physician. It's not a mandate. We need to clean a lot of this up. It's an embarrassment for the state. The legislature, to its credit, increased funding substantially to DCFS to the tune of an additional $300 million. Well, if you look back historically, we're just back to the level where we were 11 years ago. For some years it had dipped. So, but numbers of investigations are up. It's a great concern, not just in this community, but in every community in the state. And I welcome not just the input that you might have or anyone in this room might have individually, but listeners or anyone who has thoughts or input. When I talked about this earlier on WGLT, my office was inundated with calls from people who have gone through similar circumstances with their families or individuals they care about. And it's a pervasive problem. We need to address it. And I appreciate your interest.
Thank you. I have another question. As you know, 62 cents of every property tax dollar goes to the schools. And that was because for years Illinois was dead last for state funding of public education. Now that we have this new infusion of money, how have we moved up on that list? And how is that money going to be distributed? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that. Let's talk, first of all, how the money is distributed is through a very, some will say complex formula. It's 500 plus pages of new law that was put in place here a few years ago. But generally that formula, I think, is arguably one of the best in the country in terms of basing funding decisions on evidence and empirical data and best practices, and driving those resources to the districts who are most in need based on data and not some emotional driven ambiguous approach. So that formula, I think, has been lauded by groups from all sides as being top-notch. That fixed the old problem that lots of money from Springfield was, being directed to districts that it just didn't make sense when you looked at why did this one versus this one get that. So that's changed. And then since that change, we've seen these, even before, I think you saw these very significant investments year on top of year after year of more money from Springfield to the districts around the state. There's 850 or so of them. The result of that has been very positive. I can't quote the statistic, but we definitely have seen movement already. If you look at Illinois across the nation, and you're right, we had historically seen Illinois at the bottom of the rankings in terms of state commitment to school districts. Not to be confused, Illinois spends a lot of money on schools when you add up the state and local share. We spend a lot of money on education, but the share from the state, if you look across the country, was low, and we have moved up significantly. I don't know if we're in the middle of the pack now or where we rank, but we've seen some significant movement there.
Anyone else? Okay. Councilmember Painter, anything? Other questions? Okay. Other questions from members of the council? Okay. Well, one thing, in talking to a couple of the members of the council, one of the things that we wanted to ask, and it doesn't have to be an immediate answer, this is probably a question in perpetuity as we continue our inevitable coordination and cooperation together, which we certainly highly value, is what can we do? And obviously it may vary from issue to issue. It may differ from education to DCFS to cannabis to whatever, but what is it that we can do to help you in this process? And again, as I say, it's not necessarily a speak now or forever hold your peace. It's a question that continues in perpetuity. Representative Brady.
Thank you. I think you're doing it. You're doing it on many fronts, whether it's just the interaction that we have when we see each other in the community, whether it's calling, emailing, talking, whether it's your representative in Springfield and former Representative Julie Curry, who does a great job, whether it's your city manager or your assistant city manager, which I understand has a birthday today, so happy birthday, Billy. But I think you're doing it.
Oh, Billy, wow.
And I think that...
he's 29 again.
He is 29. And I think that I think that we're doing it, and I think a session like this is very helpful, not only helpful because it's early in the beginning of the session, not mid-session or later towards session, to talk about these issues and look at your capital. And you've been out ahead this time that I can remember in recent years with the capital and what are priority projects for you, even in advance of this meeting today, which is helpful. And I think my colleagues would agree with that. So can always communicate more, but I believe you're doing a good job. And anytime I've called and asked for any help, whether that be department heads, whether that be your city managers or my council representative or others, they've always been there. So I think I'm very pleased with the communication and what's going on now.
Thank you. Other comments? Leader Brady.
I'll echo what Dan says. You've got a great team. Communication is ever flowing, and the Municipal League does a good job for you as well. And the associations of your various departments also do a good job. So appreciate the opportunity to be here and have this meeting, and I look forward to continuing that communication.
Sure. Senator Barickman.
I want to first echo some of Representative Brady's comments about Julie, who is, I think, the eyes, ears, and voice of the city inside the Capitol, and that's very important, and she has a lot of respect, and I certainly appreciate what she does for the city while we're down there. You know, things move quickly, and we know who to talk to, which is very good. I'd also say, I mean, you've got some great staff I've had the pleasure to work with over the years. I would encourage all of you here and for the staff and others, it's the same thing I ask of everyone, which is you know more than me about your world. In your day-to-day jobs, ask why something is that way, and if it's wrong, bring that to our attention. Wrong doesn't necessarily mean it's an emotional issue. It might just mean there's a problem that maybe we can help fix, but we can only help fix it if you bring it to our attention. And so as you're going about your day-to-day lives and jobs, and there are things that are, this is slow, or this is inefficient, or this doesn't work the way it should, ask why that is and try to bring that to our attention so that we can work with you to try to help fix it.
Okay. Representative Summer.
Thank you, Terry, and I purposely use your first name because in addition to
I
these...
prefer that to some of the things I'm called.
No. In addition to these public forums, which are hopefully noticed by the general public and of some interest to them, I also welcome your individual inputs on your individual time or my individual time. We've had opportunities in the past to sit down over a cup of coffee and talk about things. And Tim and I and some of the members of the council that have been here a few years, and council members over the years that I've represented portions of Bloomington, we've had that opportunity. And that's just as important to me as this opportunity is. You may think of something on the way home today saying, gee, I wish I'd asked that. Please reach out. I mean, I welcome the opportunity to learn and to get to know each of you better. Sometimes the informal communication is just as beneficial. And I also want to direct comments to those who are in the, not saying the back of the room, let's say the front of the room, who really run this city on a daily basis. I know there's a chain of command and you're supposed to communicate a certain way through maybe your superior or through the city manager or the mayor, but I benefited today from just visiting with them casually and talking about topics of interest. But the same goes for you individuals too. I value what you do. And if there's a way you feel you want to communicate to each of us, please do so. Your input's in some ways more important than the input from the council because you live it every day.
Thank you very much. And we do want to thank the staff for coming out and all that they do. It's obviously, none of us could do this without you. And again, happy birthday to you, Billy. But I do want to say, in talking to several of the members of the council in between the break, it was unanimous. Those that have been to it before said that this is by far the most informative, productive meeting we've had with you all in the way that we have it in years, or any that we recall. And we certainly, very much appreciate it. And we got some great answers to some critical questions. And we, again, very much appreciate your taking your time. Any other final closing comments? Mr. Gleason?
Just a quick thank you to the elected officials, all of the elected officials, and appreciate the recognition of an excellent leadership team that we have. Also, I want to recognize it's not just Billy's birthday, but Scott Rathbun, the finance director. It's his birthday today as well.
So 2 February 1sters. Welcome. Yeah. Speech. No, I'm kidding. No speech.
And then real quick, Mayor, I'm going to pass the mic. I want Deputy City Manager Tice to have an opportunity to say something, and maybe he wraps it up with Julie Curry.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I would just echo a lot of the comments that have been made today, that we appreciate the access to our elected officials at the state level, and we've always felt welcomed in bringing questions to you, and we've always seen a responsiveness from you in my short time here. And so, I just say we appreciate it. We look forward to working with you going forward on some of the priorities that we talked about today.
I also want to echo everything that Billy and Tim just mentioned. You have some excellent legislators representing your community. You have leaders in both chambers, and I hope you know how fortunate you are to have them representing you. And I want to thank them for taking the time on a Saturday morning. I know they have a busy day ahead of them, and they work 7 days a week. I know all about that, so we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd just like to echo what Julie said, is we really do appreciate the really excellent representation that we have in Bloomington. We're very, very, very fortunate at so many different levels. Our two state senators have served in both houses of the legislature, and we've had a long, very long tenure from both of our state representatives. And obviously, just in listening to what you're talking about, I mean, you all know your stuff. And so we're very, very happy to have you and honored to have had you here today. Thank you so much, and I want to give you all a round of applause. At this point, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderman Black. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Boland. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned.